Today is Sunday, July 23rd, 2017, and this is episode 197 of the Defensive Security Podcast. My name is Jerry Bell, and joining me tonight, as always, is Mr. Andrew Callett.
Hello, Jerry.
Howdy,
How are
howdy.
you, sir?
I'm
you're,
super.
You're all over the globe. Where are you at the moment?
I am in Dublin. Beautiful Dublin. And it's actually sunny right now, which is amazing.
As in the continent, in the UK, Dublin, Ireland.
Yeah, don't say UK because I've been corrected.
Oh,
I stepped on that snake once already. Dublin or Ireland is not part of the UK.
Oh, fair enough.
And there's a lot of resentment.
There might have been a small little war over that with terrorists and such. My bad.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'll do better. But you're in Ireland for the moment.
Yes, indeed I am, and I just got back from Hungary.
Right, you're crazy, which explains why we had a little gap in recording because you've been traveling the world.
That's right. Absolutely.
You're just a world famous traveling rock star.
That's what I like to think.
Going to all the best places. So, in other news, since last we talked, I've upgraded my audio equipment. So hopefully, people can detect a little better audio sound from my side of the equation here.
And my sound took a dive, and yours took a giant leap. So
right, because you're away from all of your good recording gear because you're in a random hotel in Dublin.
That's right. So anyhow, just a reminder that the thoughts and opinions we express on the show are ours and do not represent those of our employers. And before we get into shows, I wanted to mention that a couple of upcoming things. We will be at DerbyCon.
Yes, indeed.
And then we will be at the O'Reilly Security Conference.
So I'm told.
And then we will be at the Tactical Edge Conference next year.
In lovely, scenic, historic Bogota, Colombia.
That's right.
Mm-hmm. So if we owe you money or some sort of paternity test issue came back, you can find us there.
Indeed. Alrighty. So getting into some stories. First story tonight comes from thehackernews.com, which is different than hackernews.com, by the way. I realized that too late, but anyway, the title here is Adwin Rat Returns Cross-Platform Malware Targeting Aerospace Industries. The thing I thought was interesting and novel about this is, one more data point that highlights, kind of all platforms are now being targeted. And obviously, this is just one, particular piece of malware, but this one targets Windows, Linux, Mac, and Android all in one nice little bundle.
I'm having trouble understanding. You said Mac?
This would be really devastatingly concerning to me if, in fact, Macs could get malware, but they can't.
Right.
So
clearly somebody's confused.
It's fake news. It's fake.
What? So written in Java to allow that cross-platform attack vector.
Yes.
But, just the fact you're running something in Java would slow the machine down so much, you might know at that point that you've been compromised.
But quite possibly.
No,
quite possibly. But this piece of malware, it does some interesting and concerning things like will allow captures of the camera, screen grabs, keyboard captures, and exfiltration of files. So, it's kind of the general purpose data stealing, Trojan. And the thing that, obviously it's the fact that it's cross-platform is concerning to me, but what we're seeing, I think, a lot more of is homogenization of attack techniques across different actors. And so I'm becoming more and more concerned about things like this showing up in less targeted and more commodity style attacks.
Well, it makes sense. We saw this with the rise of exploit kits and commodity attack tools. Bad guys learn from each other just as much as the good guys learn from each other.
Yes.
And
yes.
It will continue.
Right.
There's a whole market out there for people writing exploit kits and novel attack mechanisms that they sell to other people. And, if I'm a bad guy, that's actually a better way to go because I'm not actually directly attacking folks. I'm just writing the tools and I'm not incurring as much risk, hopefully.
Yeah. And, another thing that I've, as I have been airplane bound way too much lately, I was thinking about a lot of companies are maybe not in, maybe it's not the only reason, right? But they're using Macs or Linux for the purpose of helping to avoid malware, and I certainly think there's still some legs there, but one of the concerns I have is that the malware protection ecosystem, or the commercial economy around protecting Macs and Linux is much less mature than it is on Windows. And so while Windows is far more attacked, and I mean no question about it, absolutely undeniable, right? There's also a whole lot of really well functioning options for protecting Windows. And just from personal experience, I'll tell you, it's not the case on Mac and Linux. And so, while right now that might not be a big problem, I think I really think we're going to start seeing that turn.
No, I completely agree. That makes perfect sense. We have a whole ecosystem built around protecting Windows and third-party software on Windows. Yeah, you're right. That doesn't really exist on the Mac side.
Yep.
All the AV vendors and whatnot are built to work in the Windows ecosystem, and it's going to take some time for that to mature up in the other platforms.
Right. So
how was this particular rat being spread?
So this one is being spread. It's kind of funny because it's being spread through a phishing email coming from the trying to find the Mediterranean Yacht Broker Association Charter Committee.
I get plenty of emails from all the time. But I do have 6 Mediterranean yachts, so it makes sense that I would.
Yeah, and when you actually go into Trend Micro's blog post about this, they go into some detail about the actual fish that was used, and they don't really explicitly call out who is targeted, but they do talk about it's focused on aerospace industry in a couple of different countries, including the U.S. And they point out that this particular fish apparently was pretty effective because it looks legitimate, and I guess the people who were receiving it were expecting or were not surprised to have gotten something like this.
Well, know your targets, right?
Yes, indeed.
If you're going after CEOs or high-level folks, come from high-level organizations.
Yeah.
In terms of, wealth, at least.
All right. So moving on to our next story, which comes from the Register. The title is "Another Day, Another Mass Domain Hijacking." And so the reason, by the way, they have the title that way is that a couple of days before this particular incident happened, there was a big flap about the .io domain being partially hijacked and not really hijacked by a not malicious person who figured out that some of the domain the domain names used for the .io domain had expired, and so he went and registered them.
Yeah, for the main DNS
Yeah.
servers for all of .io, as I recall.
Yes. Yeah.
Right. So if somebody's trying to go to whatever .io and they don't have that information cached, these are the servers they go to first.
Yep.
And
Yep.
he was able to somewhat legitimately redirect them because something expired that shouldn't have. Because as I understand it, the .io top level domain was being transitioned to another provider.
Correct.
Sort of something got lost in translation there.
Yep. So he, he let the registrar know about it, and they pulled the domains away from him unceremoniously. I think is what he said. The way
No
he
soup for
described
you.
So what happened in this deal is that Gandhi, the domain registrar, not the person, that was
Which
a
is
joke.
a very... Oh, really?
Yeah, I know.
Maybe it sounded better in the traditional Irish. But now Gandhi is a very large registrar, as I understand it.
They are, and I know
Yeah.
that, by the way, a lot of security folk really like them because they seem to be kind of no nonsense and have some. I think they're more expensive, but they have the registration. The private registration is kind of like a default thing for them. So
Yeah, they're a more sophisticated provider, it seems like. But probably a lot of folks in the U.S. have never heard of them, is why I pointed out.
right, but they do. They are a big domain registrar, cover lots and lots of top level domains. What happened here, and we don't fully understand exactly what happened, but
Well, do you ever fully understand anything, Jerry? Do you?
no, you're right.
I just, I mean,
Um,
don't
you're right. You're right.
I
You're
don't
right.
I don't want to bring this up in front of everybody, but
Fair enough. So the credentials, some Gandhi credentials, were stolen apparently via a third party supplier to Gandhi. There's really no indication of who the supplier was or what they did, but this enabled the attacker to have control of some of the domain name servers, and in the time period they had control of these top level domain or the domain servers for Gandhi, they redirected 751 domains, and I think that would probably have been more had it not been discovered. But anyway, they redirected 751 domains to a site that was serving malware, and that apparently was going on for about 4 hours before somebody realized it was happening and notified Gandhi, and then it took Gandhi an hour to put the lid on it, and then another 3.5 hours to back out all the changes. But one of the awesome parts of DNS is that it's cached, and so it lived on for a while. And this one, by the way, got my gears turning quite a lot because we have a lot of fairly draconian data privacy laws coming online, both in the U.S. and where I'm at here in the EU. And I got to thinking, well, what if your domain got hijacked, right? And you're accepting, PI, your personal information, regulated personal information, or some kind of other data, and for some period of time, that data is going to someone else's site, and that your customers think it's going to you. And I got to wondering, who is responsible for that? I don't know what the answer is, but I don't think, for instance, that most companies, maybe even any company, would think of their domain registrar as a service provider that would need some kind of an agreement. Like if you were to outsource services under a lot of these new regulations, you have to have a special kind of data processor type agreement that defines certain contractual responsibilities and liabilities. And that kind of concept just has never really applied to a domain registrar. So
Yeah,
it's a,
it's an ugly one because when you think about it, if somebody redirects your domain to another DNS server, they can then control almost everything internet facing about your domain, including email. So if they can redirect your domain, including email, they can set up another email server and start getting all of the email destined for your site. And most folks don't have any security set up around that. It's fairly rare. It's out there, but it's rare.
right.
And they could also. There's some other stories going on right now that there are some folks issuing SSL certs maybe a little too loosely. So setting up a fake lookalike domain that maybe you could possibly make the cert look good too. You could really do some nasty work with redirecting that traffic. It's a fairly impressive, or I should say impactful attack if I can capture your DNS registrar and redirect things. I can do a lot with that.
Yeah, and actually, you have a lot of opportunities to make it even uglier because once you do that, you can do something like jack up the TTL, the time to live on the records, so that
Right, so
they
it's
might not
cached.
they might not expire for weeks.
Yeah,
And
because
holy
for those
cow.
not familiar with DNS, every DNS record you can specify how long that record will cache in another DNS server. So when somebody looks that up for the first time, it will look and say, okay, I can hold this for an hour, I can hold this for a day, I can hold this for a month, I can hold this for 20 seconds. And it respects that for not looking it up again. So if you've cached it for a week and I went and fixed my actual DNS server, your DNS server is not going to come back and look unless you force it to for whatever that timeout is, which is pretty nasty.
Yeah, and so if you're the victim of that, and even if you do proactively recognize that this sort of thing has happened, and you go and fix the issue, which by the way is often completely out of your control. Like this is in this case, as far as we know, none of the customers really had any. It was through no fault of their own. Like there was nothing those people could have done, or the domain owners could have done to avoid this, other than not use Gandhi. And
Well,
by the way, I'm not saying that Gandhi is bad. I'm just
No, but this goes to a reality we're confronting, which is we're centralizing risk in a lot of cloud-based providers. Whether it be, in this case, it's always been this way with registrars, but let's say we're doing something in Amazon. Let's say we're doing something at Microsoft's cloud or Google's cloud or whomever, or we're using Salesforce or we're using something else. We are now concentrating that risk. So we have to trust and hope that that vendor is doing their part of the security balance correctly.
right.
But by the way, I don't see another way around that. I think that's the way the world's going, and it's going to continue to go.
I think you're absolutely right, and we are going to have to get very creative about how we address the risk that comes along with that centralization. I mean, when you think about the move to just a few cloud providers, and then you think about the attacks that have been happening recently, and some of the hypothesized attacks against companies countries or economies. Now it becomes not a completely crazy thing to think that if you're you could conceivably take down somebody like Amazon and have a if you could, right? I'm not saying that you could, but if you could have a really devastating impact on an economy, because so much of the online economy is now sitting on that platform. So anyway,
Yeah, there was another article, we're not covering it today, of somebody was doing this research of a major cloud provider getting attacked would cost something like $54 billion in damages.
interesting.
I'll have to find it. Don't quote me on that because I don't have it right in front of me, but it was, then again, it could be clickbait. You never know the veracity of those articles until you really look into them.
Clickbait? Are you kidding?
That's why we title all of our shows like, "You won't believe our third story."
Number 6 will shock you. Anyway, Yeah. Speaking of shocking, by the way, there's two stories that kind of hang together next. And I thought these were interesting to cover because these show kind of maybe the real world impact of some of these high profile attacks. So FedEx and Nuance Communication have both publicly announced that their earnings are going to be negatively impacted by the NotPetya worm. And
Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, because we talk back and forth often about the long-term real impacts financially of a lot of these breaches. And
right,
often we find sometimes not so much, especially a couple years down the line. But in this case, we see SEC filings talking about financial impacts.
yeah. Now, interestingly, I didn't look at FedEx, but Nuance Communication actually, because the article about Nuance comes from CNBC, and they point out that like the day after this story came out, they were up 1%. So it's I think there's still some amount of disconnect because it's kind of like a one-time thing. It's not necessarily a change to the business operation yet. I do wonder though about from when you kind of read between the lines on this Nuance Communication story, it does sound like it's conceivable they'll lose business, and that's the kind of thing I think that would turn into like a real long-term shareholder value kind of impact. Whereas like if a company has a data breach and the same company or same customers are going to be shopping there tomorrow, you know, even if they get fined, it doesn't structurally harm the business. But so FedEx apparently it was. I thought it was actually FedEx that got hit, but apparently it was a recent acquisition of theirs, TNT Express, that got hit, and I guess they got hit pretty bad because they didn't know where a lot of shipments were. So
Yeah, it's interesting on this one, and I also wonder too if companies are struggling with what they need to put in SEC filings when it comes to these sorts of things, so they could be being overly cautious by just including them in their 10Ks to cover their butt, as it were.
yeah, well that's true. That's true. I think we have we had. I don't know if we've talked about it recently, but I think there has been some kind of scolding, or at least looking down the bridge of the SEC looking down the bridge of their nose at companies who hadn't filed, um, the right disclosure in their in their 10K or 10Q reports. So maybe this is like you said, maybe that's what this is. And by the way, it's also not out of the realm of possibility that they just had a bad quarter.
And they're blaming it on this. Well, I think there's some checks and balances on that front, but yeah.
Yeah, I've seen it. I've seen some things before.
Well, Bob's told me some stories that
Yeah,
would make accountants' hairs curl, I think.
yeah.
So
Anyway,
interesting too on this front. We did a whole show on NotPetya last time, but they mention here again the fact that even those who paid the ransom couldn't get their files back, and how quickly things spread over VPN connections to other partners. Every time this happens, these companies come out and say, well, we're strengthening and hardening our systems, and which I'm sure they are, but we talk about...
Are they doing it in meaningful ways, I guess? Right?
Exactly my point. Are they truly saying, well, okay, how do we segment properly or more effectively to minimize the spread of a worm, and how we... Every big company I've been in, when you talk about doing a major revamp of their environment to include something like segmentation to fight this kind of thing, it's a non-starter.
Right.
It seems next to impossible to get the resources, the the buy-in, the potential business disruption, the risks involved through the executives. Why are we going to do that? I don't know. We got stuff to do that's a lot less risky and going to make us money. And that's one thing I think is an interesting problem right now is existing companies who have existing network environments that weren't designed with more segmentation and best practices to minimize a spread of this kind of thing are going to be at a huge disadvantage compared to new competitors coming on the market who may potentially just embrace a cloud model to begin with, or perhaps segment. I don't know. I guess what I'm saying is that the older and bigger a company is, the less likely they are to seem to ever embrace the concept of redesigning their network environment.
I think you're probably right. At the same time, I also had the thought, I was thinking about, we talked about this last time on the NotPetya episode, but there was a hospital who had decided to, rather than try to clean up their systems, they would just start over. They bought all new network stuff, they bought all new computers and whatnot, and so I got to wondering, or metaphorically, it's almost like a forest fire. So this kind of thing in a big company could be the impetus for that kind of and maybe it's the only one.
Maybe, but here's how it's going to go. Wow, we just got completely burned by NotPetya. What are we going to do about this? Well, I just got this email from this vendor with a blinky box that says it can fix the problem.
The webinar starts in a half hour.
Right.
Let's join. Oh, God.
I really honestly think that as long as that sort of marketing exists to do a bolt-on to fix the problem, that's where people are going to go. To go do a fundamental rework, that's asking a lot.
Yeah, you're probably right. But I guess that's the only. I think it is the only opportunity. I think because it is. Change doesn't happen at least in my experience. Massive change like that doesn't happen in the absence of something, some kind of crisis.
Oh, I would agree. And it has to be a big enough crisis that it drives enough reaction without truly putting the company at massive peril.
Right.
If it's an existential issue, then you may not recover to begin with. But
right.
I don't know. I think there's a lot of momentum not to change network design once it's established.
Yeah, but in this, I don't know if it's this article or the CNBC article or the Data Breach Today article, but there was a mention about how a number of security companies are reporting that NotPetya spread through VPNs. And Nuance, in the article about Nuance, they talk about how doctors are kind of stuck because they can't use the Nuance medical transcription service. And what do we know? There were a bunch of hospitals, or not a bunch, but there were several hospitals in the U.S. who were infected with NotPetya. And so, I'm not tying them together, but I'm not tying them together. So,
way to walk that careful line of not.
I know, not. It's double negative.
That's just that executive training you got there.
Totally. People pay real money for that.
But this goes once again to showing that we're getting some long tails in some of these the worms and threats that are running around. That we're getting some big worms back at the end of the day, and like we've mentioned on previous shows, people forgot about these. We didn't design for these.
Yeah, you know what? And I do want to go off on a little tangent for a second. This really does show, and I guess it is a situation where worms are one of the few ways this manifests itself as a real problem that we can all relate to. I think there are other problems that we may not be able to relate to, but it's the interconnectivity risk. If you play the game 6 degrees of separation, right? We're kind of getting that type of deal going between corporate networks. And how
Yeah,
many
yeah,
hops?
that's called the internet.
Well, no, but quote inside the
I know.
firewall, right?
I'm teasing. No,
And,
you're
and
right. And this, I think, is where we really have to shift our mindset away from internal and external. Now, I'm not trying to
yes,
say the firewall is dead. I'm not saying that, but we have so many more perimeter connections now. I don't think we're managing the other connections well. There's too much trust being established. And that could be because it's just difficult and time consuming and expensive to manage those other partner connections the same way we manage our internet connections.
right.
And business needs to get done, and you get a firewall request, or we need to get this lease line up, or this whatever connection over this VPN to our friends over at this other company, and these ports need to get through, and just get it done by Tuesday.
Yep.
That's a tough thing to fight when you're the lone InfoSec guy going, but hey, some things might happen here. Hey, guys.
Might not be a good idea. Maybe.
Guys. I'll be in the corner.
Can't relate to that at all.
But we just keep seeming to be making the same mistakes over and over again. And maybe, because we're focusing on the issues that for 95% of businesses, this is never a problem. So therefore, it's reinforced behavior. I don't know.
Yeah, but when it is a problem, it seems like it happens in spectacular fashion. Home Depot, Target, OPM, all of these, well, many of these.
But to be fair, if it's not spectacular, it wouldn't hit the news and we wouldn't know about it.
Yeah, I mean that's a fair point, but at the same time, it is happening, right?
It's like shark attacks in Florida.
Yeah.
I'm just playing devil's advocate enough to say.
I have my shark-proof rock, so I carried my.
Now, to be fair, there are a lot of people doing studies and research on this that, if we were less lazy, we could look this up and know the truth. But
yeah, I got stuff to do.
Running around the EU, apparently.
That's right. All right, and then our last story comes from, let's see, the Kaspersky blog. Actually, I think it originally comes from SecurityWeek.com. And the title on that report, or this story, is Alarming Percentage of Employees Hide Security Incidents. This is like I mentioned, this is a report that Kaspersky Security released. Kaspersky has had its own share of drama recently, but won't talk about that right now.
There's a man behind me that says I'm not allowed to make any comments on that.
I see him.
I think his name might be Ivan.
Yes. Anyhow, so Kaspersky commissioned a company to go and run a big survey and ask some questions about insider threat. And, unsurprisingly, they found that companies generally think of their insiders as their biggest risk. And
now, to be fair, they think of that more, not that they're all out to get the company, but that they're careless,
yes.
thoughtless, make mistakes.
Between mistakes, intentional, lack of training, losing devices,
right?
That sort of thing.
The insider, the term insider threat could mean rogue employee. So just
well, I mean, so I think of insider threat as being intentional and unintentional.
Sure.
It's, but anyway, I will say, I really tried hard to get the numbers to make sense. I sat down and I looked through the numbers and damn it, they don't make sense. But that's not the they have some pretty charts in the blog post.
Jerry, let me ask you a question.
Sure.
If you were running a company to do surveys for other companies, and that company was coming to pay you money to run that survey,
Yeah. I get it. I get it. It would come out the way they wanted it to come out. I get
I
it.
just, I just, I know that this may sound like crazy talk, like I'm calling the Earth flat. I know. I understand this is a radical proposition that I'm putting out there,
Yeah.
but personally, I think the best surveys is when people run around the floor of, like Gartner conference and ask random people things. I think those surveys,
Well,
awesome.
that's totally scientific. Just like Twitter polls. Absolutely
And,
100% scientific.
and anything Pokemon puts out.
Oh, oh,
Oh,
oh.
I mean Ponemon. Sorry,
Oh,
my bad.
oh, oh dear. That was bad.
We'll
That was
strike that. We'll just
yeah.
edit that out.
We'll delete that. Anyway, so again, the numbers don't make a ton of sense because they point out that the survey results are kind of indicate that the people surveyed believe that employees are the biggest risk, and then they talk about how the data supports it, but then they put out some charts that don't really support it. So anyway, that's not the thing that I got I took away from this article. What I took away from this was that people, some number of people, are not are hiding incidents, and more importantly, IT people believe that employees are not reporting incidents.
That matches up with my anecdotal evidence and my experience. Absolutely.
And so there were 2 points. One is I do think it happens, but I one of the things I struggle, especially after reading this report, was do we really do these people really have an expectation that the people really understood that there was an incident and then they chose not to report it, or are they just completely ignorant that they did something dumb? And so that's kind of point number one. But I think the bigger issue is that yes, we can all agree that people are definitely not reporting incidents when they become aware of it consistently, and a lot of that has to do with kind of the structural and philosophical responses that many companies have to incidents. And they have a couple of anecdotes which honestly seemed a little contrived, but whatever. One of the anecdotes was, an employee um, was really frustrated with her work computer, and so she convinced the company to let her use her personal computer, but she had admin rights on her personal computer, and so because she had admin rights, her computer ended up getting ransomwared, and she, rather than reporting it to the IT department, she paid the ransom, which was $300, got her files back, but she didn't know that her computer was still infected with the ransomware, and so she took her computer back to work and plugged it into the network, and then subsequently all of the file shares that she was connected to got locked up too, and now the entire company was held for ransom, not just her laptop. So again, seemed a little contrived, but that is not an unbelievable story. I don't, it seems a little odd, but if something like that happened, I do know that it is a pretty common, even in the IT space, it is a pretty commonly held thing that if you run antivirus and clean off the malware, like it's just you're good to go.
Well, I think there's a lot of psychological aspects to this sort of story. And I do think that this is, again, a very likely outcome. I think there's a couple things. I think there is a lack of in-depth knowledge with the average employee because they're not IT security professionals. Their skill set is in other areas that they bring to the company, and we can't expect everybody in an organization to be an IT security professional. They've got other stuff to do. I do think there's this concept of I'm going to get punished. I'm going to get in trouble. If I can avoid that, I will. We don't really foster a no negative consequence environment around this, especially when we start talking about all the regulations around DLP and data classification and consequences if you misuse that. There's a lot of gray area here that I think could really scare employees, that they don't necessarily want to come forward because it could be very negative on them. And that's something we should probably think about with our policies and processes and whatnot. And I think the third aspect of this is a lot of employees, I think, have the mindset that at the end of the day, security is not their problem. That's the security department's problem. That's the IT department's problem. They got other things to do. Why are they doing security's job?
No, that last part is absolutely a big problem. The other thing that concerns me is I had mentioned a lot of these new data privacy regulations. There's the new GDPR, which has some really hefty fines, and there's the New York DFS. Apparently, the Colorado is implementing something similar to New York's, and they all have 72-hour 72-hour requirements to notify,
which I find just
amazing.
I
mean, it is amazing, and I agree with that. But that's that's a discussion for beers.
It
right?
is what it is, right?
It is what it is. But here's the challenge. Now, if you have an employee who is aware that something happened, one of the most egregious, as far as I understand at least, one of the most egregious things that you're going to get dinged for by the data protection authorities is if you are aware there was an incident and you don't report it. And now you have what we're basically saying here is that we recognize that we have employees occasionally making mistakes that will likely result in some circumstances a data breach, and now the company they work for has an obligation to report that to the data protection authority, and they are an employee of the company. And so I'm not a lawyer. I don't know what kind of where the company comes out on that, but it doesn't sound good to me. So I think the point is, I think this is I think getting better at this is going to become much more important.
Well, agreed completely. And I think that we still haven't figured out the level of stick and carrot around these sorts of incidents. But I think we need to. The employee is now the target. It used to be that the perimeter was the target. That's long gone. That's the past. But I think a lot of our regulations, a lot of our process, a lot of our best practices are built around the perimeter still being the target. Until we shift to realize that we're in a psychological war with the bad guys, we're not going to have the right processes around getting our employees to you get these flippant comments like, your employees are your first line of defense and the employees are your best IDS. But if they're afraid to talk to the security department because of myriad of reasons, they're going to get their machine taken away, they're not going to be able to be productive, and then their boss is going to be mad at them, or they're going to be made fun of or ridiculed, or they think they did something wrong, or even worse, they're going to get written up or potentially fired. I don't think they're going to willfully come forward in most cases.
Absolutely. The other thing that troubled me about this report, and I just remembered it, so I'm going to go back to it. They talk about the different kinds of things that employees do that will cause a breach, and they talk about falling for fishes. And the thing that concerns me is we still are viewing that as a failure of the employee. And maybe in certain
Correct.
circumstances that is appropriate, but man, I have, I think that's quickly becoming outmoded thinking and also contributing to the problem.
I completely agree, contributing to the problem. Completely agree that it's the wrong mode of thinking. But most of the technical people I talk to have this arrogance around this. That, dumb user clicked on a link. I don't know.
Yeah, because that's their damn job.
Right. And I think that the bad guys are going to continue to find reasons for users to click on links. This is the problem. This is, again, a psychological battle. And like you said, it's their damn job. You know, I'm currently in the rounds of helping to interview for a position, and I'm just thinking about all these resumes that are getting attached to our system in PDF format and Word format, and I have to open them and look at them. I'm like, going, God, look. I have to open
roulette.
them.
Russian
Right.
roulette.
And I keep coming back to, I think I just sat through mandatory training recently on, phishing, and it was so outdated. It was like, oh, there might be, look for spelling errors. I'm like, that's just not the case anymore.
But
the bad guys are
but I
getting
bet they
smart.
got a good price on the training, so
Right, well,
that was
yeah,
okay.
yeah. The point is, and we've said this over and over, yes, you can train your folks. Yes, you can do awareness training and simulations, and that helps. But at the end of the day, if you're not backing that up with some sort of technology control or assuming that somebody someday is going to click, you're setting yourself up for a world of hurt, because it's going to happen.
Right. Absolutely. So anyway,
So, I don't know. It's a tough one, and I really don't. I wonder if in some cases companies are somewhat in denial about this issue, because then they would have to deal with it if they weren't, so flippant about blaming the user.
right. That's a good point. That now you got to do something, right? If you can't blame the employee, it's your problem.
Right. Which somewhat speaks back to the fact that employees don't want to report security incidents.
Right. Yeah.
So it's a tough one. It's a tough situation, and I think we do the best we can. But it goes back to the old phrase of trust but verify. Try to train them. But you probably still need your own instrumentation and metrics and reporting mechanisms to identify when something's going sideways.
Yep. So that was the show. That was our this is our first intercontinental recording.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It I think it went okay.
Yeah.
Only 8 llamas were harmed in the making of this episode.
It's, sacrifice is needed sometimes. Anyhow, thank you all. I hope to be back on a normal schedule. I should be back in the U.S. next week, so if it works out and I'm not too jet lagged, then we'll probably do it again next week. And I do want to just give another shout out to our Patreon donors. Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Absolutely, you guys are awesome.
And
Thank you.
a reminder to check out the website, www.defensivesecurity.org, to get the links of the stories we talked about tonight and all of our back episodes. You can follow the show on Twitter at DefensiveSec. You can follow Mr. Callett on Twitter at Lerg, that's Lerg, and me on Twitter at MaliciousLink. And with that, we will talk again real soon.
Have a great week, everybody. Thanks. Bye-bye.
Take care. Bye-bye.